Hi, this is the Social Jello with Angelo show. My name's Angelo. I'm a social scientist, surfer, martial artist, and a whole lot of other things. Coming to you live from Kasai City, Japan, the Social Jello with Angelo show.
What's up, and welcome to Social Jello with Angelo. Today I'm here with Bob Heuer, a black belt in Kajukenbo coming from the Tum Pai method. Now, what I want to say is this is part of a series where I was asked a question by one of my viewers, and we're going to open up with the question, and then we're going to, like I was telling Sifu Bob here off camera, then we're going to kind of make this into a discussion. So here's the question. This comes from Aromatic Illustrator 7 from Reddit. Thank you very much for following the show, Aromatic. And that's not really your name, but we're just going to use your handle. So he says, hello, I just started training in Kajukenbo here in Southern California. I'm 45 years old and I have a black belt in judo. I'm curious, do you have a video explaining what's the difference between the Emperado method, the Garcia method, the Tum Pai method, the Gaylord method, etc.? What makes each of these styles different? And is one better than the other for true self-defense? Now, that last part, we're not going to go there. I don't like making comparison statements, but we are going to talk about that. So I'm just going to go ahead and hand this over to Bob. And I honestly don't know much about the Tum Pai method. That's what we kind of, each episode, I just did one with the Gaylord method and one about the Garcia method. And we're just kind of talking about how these methods came about, and I'm learning along with my viewers. So I'm just going to hand things over to you. You're the expert today.
All right.
So I'm just going to ask you.
Great.
So let's start off with what is the Tum Pai method, and how did all that? Where did that get started? Who founded that?
Sure. Well, actually, the first use of the name was Al Dela Cruz and Al Dacascos started training with Sijo after they trained with Sid Asuncion, and he gave the name Tum Pai to what they were doing at the time. What Sijo told me is he wanted to go further in the direction of close combat range, compared to what they had at that time. Though it was pretty short-lived because Sifu Dacascos moved to California and went that direction. So, but they give credit where it's due. That's where the Tum Pai name came from, and so it lay dormant. And Al Dacascos did Chuan Fa, Al Dela Cruz, and then went into the Chuan Fa branch, and basically incorporating Chinese system forms, Northern Salam techniques. And Sijo liked that direction. He thought that was a good expansion of the core that he had, before that. So my teacher, Sifu Yan Warren, Sijo invited him over in December of '78 and trained with him. And Sifu Yan had gotten real into Tai Chi on top of his Kajukenbo. And his teacher, his lineage was Joe Clark, who was one of the first black belts of Tony Ramos. So that was how the lineage came down to that way. And anyway, Al Dacascos had already been accepted as the second branch with Chuan Fa, and then further into a third branch with Wun Hop Kendo. So my teacher asked permission if he could revise some of the tricks, the punch counters, and the forms to more reflect what he felt was really valid principles and from Tai Chi. And he felt Tai Chi was a good addition to the Kajukenbo curriculum for your health, to make it more balanced. Sijo said, well, I'll let you do revisions of the form of the pinyons and the tricks, but you have to have 4 things to qualify as a branch, and 4 unique aspects you bring into the Kajukenbo system. So one was to make the Tai Chi curriculum part of the Kajukenbo curriculum. The other was to revise the forms and tricks, and then he'd approve it or not. And then it was he wanted to bring herbal medicine into part of the curriculum. He was real well known for his Ditta brew that he made. And then outdoor training was the 4th element. And so Sijo said, well, okay, tentatively, I'll give you permission. he came back up to, actually, Sijo came to the Northwest in '84, and then he certified Tum Pai as the 4th branch. So, and he asked him, can I resurrect the name Tum Pai? You know, so when Sijo came, I was the one with the school at the time. My teacher had moved, and he watched me demonstrate, you know, how the things we'd revised and explain it. And, you know, and his direction to me was self-defense is usually nose to nose, or you're dealing with a rush or nose to nose. And he wanted us to, you know, and enhance upon that theme, you know, doing our counters literally almost nose to nose, and develop the inside range. So that's kind of the path we took off on. And like I say, he certified what he saw that time in '84. So,
Right.
yeah.
So I have a few questions. I have a few questions
Sure.
and one clarification I want to make. So anybody watching this episode, if for some reason this is your first episode, which is you're gonna be lost. So all I want to say, I'm just gonna put a quick footnote. Sijo is known as Sijo Adriano Imperato. He's the founder of Kajukenbo. If you don't know what Kajukenbo is, at the end of this episode, there's a "What is Kajukenbo" episode. We're not going there today. And so he keeps mentioning Sijo, who's the founder of Kajukenbo. He's the person that put this all together. Now, with that being said, one of my first questions, because you kind of briefly mentioned it, and I'm trying to just clarify the name. So, okay, so you were saying, I think if I heard you correctly, your instructor asked Sijo to bring back the Tum Pai method name. Is that correct?
He asked if he could use it again.
Okay, and who was your instructor? What was his name? Or
Sifu
her
Yang
name?
Lauren. Sifu Yang Lauren.
Okay, Sifu Yang Lauren. Okay, so Sifu Yang Lauren started using what you just talked about, and he's the one who asked, "Hey, let's is it okay if we bring back this whole Tum Pai thing?" And then I'm still trying to figure out. So if I heard you correctly, Al DeCascos a long time ago, and for anybody watching or listening, there's another episode I did somewhere with Kajukenbo Black Belt John Hoylo, where we talk about famous names in Kajukenbo. Al DeCascos, because of Mark DeCascos, his son, who's been in a bunch of movies. So if you want to check out that, I urge you to just Google Mark DeCascos. You're going to see a bunch of the films he's in. They're more into the Hollywood scene, and they really worked with a lot of people. So what is? I'm trying to figure out how is Al DeCascos connected to what's happening right now with Tum Pai, or was that kind of a first generation thing like back then?
Well, you know, Al DeCascos, of course, is Woon Hop Kendo, that branch of Kajukenbo. We've always had a good relationship with him. I started doing Ramos method, Chuan Fa, Kajukenbo. That's where I got my black belt in. And that was in 1980, but I started in '74. But so it was from the Costas had a real big influence in the Northwest. There was only 4 teachers when I started in the Northwest. There was Rich Manetti, who was a black belt of Gabe Vargas, who came from the Gaylord branch. He was in Eugene. And then his student, Fred King, was in Portland. My teacher's teacher, Joe Clark, was in Seattle. And that's where my teacher learned Kajukenbo was from Joe. And then my teacher moved to the little town in Southwest Washington, Kelso, and opened a school there. So there was a pretty limited, but DeCascos was doing seminars. You know, at that time, DeCascos' people were really making an impact on the tournament circuit. You know, you had Eric Lee, Bill Owens, Malaya DeCascos, a number of them really were taking it, you know. So, but he came up and did seminars. He brought Howard Jackson up at one time to do a seminar at the Kelso School. And so he had a real big influence on what we were doing at the time. And, you know, and certainly our roots connect with Tum Pai, at least at name. You know, when I talked to him, he goes, well, there's really no, it was more in terms of the spirit of the art. We didn't stay long. I think he got his black belt in '63, and then I think he came to the mainland in '64.
All right, all right. So, and again, for the person who requested this series originally, so you can kind of see how all these things kind of connect, which is why it's really hard to say, well, which method is the best? Well, it's not really well, because each method's working with each other. Really, it's
Yeah,
kind of hard to be like, oh, this is a clear cut. And I think that's one thing we can walk away. What I'm walking away so far from interviewing two other people from two other methods, and now this third one is, it's kind of hard to clear cut and say, oh no, this is the Emperado or the Emperado method or the Gaylord method, and this is the Tempai method. And they're completely. It's not exact. That's not exactly how it works in Kajukenbo. Like you just mentioned there was a Gaylord guy from the Gaylord method that ended up. This happens a lot in Kajukenbo where you get your
sure.
black belt. Our mentality. I don't know. I shouldn't say our. I hate to make generalized statements. To my understanding, what I was taught by my
Mhm.
instructor,
Yeah,
and what I learned from Shizu Allen Abad before he passed was when you get your black belt, you are starting all over again. You're going to be starting all over again, and you're going to start looking at all the aspects of Kajukenbo. And now is your opportunity to grow within the Kajukenbo community. It's always open to you, but it becomes even more open to you as a black belt. So you're going to end up going to different methods, different styles, maybe even outside of the actual organization of Kajukenbo, you'd be going into other styles like jiu-jitsu or judo, but you're open to kind of really grow
yeah,
as an
right.
artist. So it's not surprising to hear that, lo and behold, when you look at the methods, how they kind
Mhm.
of how they kind of work together, and
Sure,
not so much separate.
sure.
So I have one of the things you mentioned really briefly, and I'm just really curious about. So you mentioned these. I'm gonna mess this up. Zai brew, Zita brew. Did I say that? I messed that up, didn't
Yeah,
I?
yeah.
You mentioned some sort of brew,
Oh,
something.
dit dodge out.
Okay,
Yeah,
what is?
it's a liniment. It's a liniment you put on bruises and on your knuckles as you're conditioning your knuckles. And my teacher actually learned it when he was in the Coast Guard in Malaysia, and just continued to refine his recipe. Isn't quite the right word, but that's a good way to describe it. So he was kind of known for having a really potent, good ditton jowl. Um, my little side story with that was when I first started training, we did a lot of forearm training, and and I bruised up like crazy, and but I was skeptical. You know, American, you kind of get skeptical of liniments. And he goes, "Well, put it on one arm and don't put it on the other, and see what you look like the next day." Because I was bruising, and the next day, the arm I put it on, the bruises had spread out, and the arm I didn't, the bruises were still vivid. And 2 days later, that arm was clear bruising, and this arm was starting to spread out. So I went, well, it's clearly doing something. So anyway, but I think that was the start. You know, he had very strong opinions that a Sifu in China wasn't just teaching you self-defense or, weapons or fighting. He was a doctor too. In many of the villages, they were doctors. And so he had a strong slant to, developing herbology and, the Tai Chi, the health aspects, and how that made a well-rounded martial artist.
So it's kind of like, I guess for anyone listening who still might be confused, it's kind of like an ointment, kind of like tiger balm, but it sounds like
Yeah,
a lot more potent.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
cool,
for
cool.
sure. Yeah,
Cool. I've heard similar stories too about people in Thailand who make their own ointments similar to tiger balm and use it in this very similar way that you just mentioned.
for
So,
sure.
kind of going back into my questions here, I think so far, I think you've answered most of the ones I had. Okay. Um, so going back to how would you, so you kind of talked about this a little bit, but going a little deeper into it, is there any clear distinction that you would say, or because you practice in it, it makes the, what would you say defines the Tum Pai self defense? Like if I were to look at Tum Pai self defense or Emperado self defense or the other
Yeah.
methods of self defense, what do you think is something that's kind of either unique or stands out in the way your group approaches self defense?
Well, I think you need to hear the background. when I started, we knew of branches, but we didn't think of methods or branches. We just all considered ourselves Kajukenbo, you know. So Rich Benetti was like uncle to me. He was 3 years older, but he'd come up to school, teach a class, spar with it, and he was a phenomenal spar. Probably the most complete spar I've ever seen. And tremendous with sweeps, let alone his kicks and punches. And then Sifu Al would come, and he'd teach you fighting principles explosively quick, but we didn't think of it in terms of we're learning Wun Hak Bin Do. We just had Sifu Al coming in and showing us stuff. We had Sifu Rich or Sigung Joe, so it was more people connected versus styles, or we didn't see divisions. We just saw Sifu Al going, well, here's how I do a hyperextension front leg round kick versus a slide up, and my people are winning with this because the other people in tournaments are doing slide ups. So we didn't think in that terms of branches, styles, and differences. It was almost like, well, he's my uncle and he showed me a great method, thank you. So which there wasn't, we didn't get a lot of exposure to the the California crew that came out from California or from the Hawaii. Sifu Al was the main one that we saw so much. So and so what I'm doing it's Kajukenbo. I mean, we added to what we had, the original core foundation. So like the Imperato method, if you looked at the tapes that Sifu Gary Forback made, we knew that. We were doing that. We did Tai Chi too, as part of our curriculum, where our technique, the main emphasis was, when you're trying to take what I guess they call soft style, because that's what it was supposed to be. It was more circular methods, but even more so like defensively. Instead of, we when you early Kajukenbo, they're all called strikes. So you didn't block, you struck. And it's a tool in your tool bag. So Tum Pai, everything from head movement to moving your body. And the main two drills that we did on top of Kajukenbo were Chi Sao from Wing Chun and push hands from Tai Chi. My teacher took those two, which were usually done in stationary positions, and said, okay, let's start moving with this. And so you started getting a three-dimensional approach inside. Your foot's always working. You're not just hands only. And push hands wasn't the ability to push. Push hands of how to deal with being pushed. I'll see push hand competitions and I go, oh, you missed the essence. The essence is, how's the small guy make this stuff work against a bigger guy? And so to me, technically I love to use boxing when you compare methods, because in my era, we had Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Leonard, Joe Frazier, really contrasting styles. George Foreman, everybody thought Frazier was the killer until Foreman wiped him out. But then Ali comes around and beats Foreman. And so my always take was like hard style versus soft style was, well, you couldn't expect Sugar Ray Leonard to fight George Foreman standing there slugging it out. And of course, he's going to use, Sifu Al taught us fighting principles that was coming from Joe Louis and Bruce Lee. In fighting principles, you have 4 defensive choices: runner, jammer, blocker, and a combination of those 4. The fighting principles are more like the definitions if you're going to read fencing. Then, of course, opposite of that was the 5 angles of attack: direct, indirect, combination, broken, rhythm, and mobilization. You match those together and you find that blocking, all of them work against blockers. So if you look at it in a self-defense piece with soft style, it's be able to block be able to the jam, be able to move your body, your footwork, combine them all, and now you're the best defensive you can be. Soft style will be saying, let's not just stick with one of those. Let's get good at all. And I like to take it to go, watch boxing. You got guys that are just going to learn to move their head as part of a drill. So getting good at defense is as good as getting good at offense. So, and that's, I think, if I were going to categorize what Tum Pai tried to do was, we just keep adding. Is adding. What was unique was, from my teacher's point, is let's make Tai Chi. So you got something in the art, and that's what Sijo Emperado wanted to, is this is good for our art. We certainly fight and do self-defense, and we're rugged, but we need to round off this yin-yang piece with the health aspects. And the outdoor training to me is a fun one to explain. My teacher had 60 acres up 11 miles up the Little Clamor River from I-5, remote. And we built a bridge off over the river up there. And then he developed this property, built a number of cabins. So our advanced class, every Saturday, if it didn't rain, we drove up there. So we're there at 7 a.m. and we worked out for 2 hours. The first hour was clearing stumps out of his property. We worked. It was kind of like the old Karate Kid movies, But then you trained and you're wearing your work boots, your jackets, and you sparred. And it was an eye-opener when a guy kicks you with steel-toed boots in the shin, and can grab you and dump you, and you're not worried about being on a concrete floor like our school was. And you go, pulling your hair, grabbing your... So we took that Kajukenbo element of there's no rules and everything, you can do everything, into the self-defense. A sidebar, it was fun to, like the Sifu at that time, Sifu Fred's school was the closest in Portland, Fred came. And we were like cousins. He'd bring his guys up, or we go down there, but we loved to get them outside on the property. And we kicked their legs. They weren't used to getting kicked in the legs, and dumping them with the thing, pulling their hair, throwing grass and dirt on them. And it was another idea of self-defense other than a ring, so to speak, So I loved it. But I thought, that was the outdoor training, but it was an eye-opener. You hadn't done it. That's a different dimension. So
that reminds me. This is the Kajukenbo thing. So like, I've been training one of my friends who does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I keep telling him, everything you do in Kajukenbo is really based on whatever you want to do, really. And we were grappling, and we got to the edge, and there was like this kind of like a pole, and it's a padded studio. And he started using his leg against the wall to keep me from sweeping him. And I told him, that's really good. That's very Kajukenbo of you. No, using whatever you have around you. And it reminded me of, again, outdoor training. When I first started training a long time ago, and we'd have these sparring sessions at my house in the front yard, and we had a carpet that we'd throw over the dirt, but it was just dirt. There was a tree, there was roots.
Yeah.
If you fell funny, you'd land on a root. And people would always ask, so is the tree out of bounds? I'm like, no, the tree is in bounds. You use that tree however you want to use it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's a very Kajukenbo. If anybody wondering, it's a very Kajukenbo thing to do. I like the grass throwing though. I wish we could throw more dirt and grass. Maybe I shouldn't have covered it with a carpet. Well, yeah, we're almost at the end of our show here. But before we wrap up, I guess this is something I ask a lot of different instructors. Anybody who just got through the show who doesn't do any martial arts and is interested in trying martial arts and wants to start training in something. What's your advice for someone walking in looking for something new to try?
I think the teacher's more important than the style. Kajukenbo, in essence, is tremendously good people who are open-minded And that's what made it Kajukenbo what it is. And if I was telling, well, people ask me that, hey, I live in Spokane, what do I look for? Go in and see if it's a teacher you can relate to. Does he look technically good, but is he somebody you want to spend time with and train with? You know, what I was a police chief, and my number one thing I did when I hired new cops was I asked myself, do I want to work with this guy for 5 years? You know, I think that's just tremendously valid nowadays, especially with martial arts. Is just, does he exhibit the character along with technique? You know, that's what you're looking for.
All right. Well, Seafood Bob, I really appreciate you coming out virtually, sharing your stories and your knowledge and all of the history of the Tum Pai lineage, how it worked out. And to my listeners, thank you so much for supporting the show. As you see, if you ask me a question, I will start doing a deep dive and interviewing a bunch of people to answer it for you. So if you have questions, feel free to message me. And if anybody wanted to train with you, Bob, where can they find you?
Well, I'm in Kelso, Washington, and I'm not actively teaching anybody but my black belts. But there's a number of schools, you know, around that we could point them to. I just want to briefly mention too, all I've really talked to is about up till 85. We've gone a long way since 85. You know, with a lot of schools that have done real well. My best brother in Kajukenbo, Doug Bailey, has a big group. So it would be remiss if I talk about Tum Pai and I don't mention what happened beyond. That's just the inception. So anyway.
Okay, so here's an even better question. If someone wants to study the Tum Pai method, what are some places that you would recommend to find the Tum Pai method of Kajukenbo?
Yeah, we have, there's an active school in Vancouver with Mark Moy. He's one of the professors. There's another school in St. Helens, Oregon with Kirk Rast. He's one. Mark Casey has a school in Lacey, Washington. There's more that are a number of garage type studios. So those are the ones that are still kind of commercial buildings. Like, you know, COVID took its toll on having a commercial building. Nobody could pay rent and not use it for 3 years, but it'll spring back, you know. But I think it'll spring back far more in garage type studios versus commercial stuff.
And I forget, is the Tum Pai method? Don't you folks have like a big gathering every year? Is that?
Oh yeah,
right.
We'll have our once a year now. We'll do a workshop. So that's coming up in March, and GM's Jerry Forback, Kenji, and Ron Estello are all coming up, and then we'll do our luau every September, and that's open. Of course, everything's always open to Kajukenbo. We're just an expression or a branch, but a Tum Pai. But we're Kajukenbo Tum Pai. Kajukenbo is always the top. So, and we have a blast. We have music, lots of food. You know, sometimes a seminar in it, but it's for brotherhood. That's what that luau is all about.
So, if any Kajukenbo folks want to find that luau, those events, if I'm not mistaken, they can find them on your Facebook page, right?
We have a website. We have the Tum Pai Kung Fu or Tum Pai Kajukenbo Tum Pai website, and then we're going to start producing videos. You know, we're kind of old school where we didn't do that, you know, and now we're doing it bit by bit. So, you know, because people want to see what is it, you know. So I always tell them it's Kajukenbo first. That's the key. So yeah.
All right. So you heard it here. Look for their website online, and I know, and also they have a Facebook page too. So if you're a Kajukenbo, practitioner or interested in Kajukenbo, check it out.
Yeah.
And again, Seafood Bob, thank you so much.
You bet.
And I always forget to do this. I was supposed to do this. This is why I say I'm not a YouTuber. I have my stuff on YouTube, but I'm an awful YouTuber. So after a 45-35 minute interview, I'm going to ask you to subscribe to my channel. and to please share it with your friends. I'm supposed to say that first. I really don't care because I just like I just like talking about martial arts and Kajukenbo.
Sure.
Either way, I'll catch you all later. Thanks again, Bob.
All right, you too.